Writing wasn't invented for stories. The oldest confirmed writing in human history is a spreadsheet of beer rations, not a poem, not a prayer, not a royal proclamation carved in stone. A list of barley, of beer, of who got how much. And pressed into that same wet clay around 5,100 years ago in the city of Uruk, modern-day Iraq, is a name. Kushim. We don't know if Kushim was a man or a woman. We don't know their title, their face, their family. We know only that they counted something, and they signed it. This is no history. We follow the evidence backward to where human invention actually started, not where we wish it had. Ask most people when writing was invented, and they'll give you roughly the right answer. Somewhere around 5,000 years ago, somewhere in the ancient Middle East. Ask them why it was invented, and the story changes completely. Writing, we assume, was born from the human need to record meaning, to preserve stories across generations, to capture the words of gods and kings before memory could betray them. It's a beautiful idea. It's also wrong, at least for the first few centuries. The earliest confirmed writing system, proto-cuneiform, emerging in Uruk between roughly 3400 and 3100 BCE, contains almost no religion, no poetry, no narrative at all. It contains ledgers. The Iliad, the Book of Genesis, the Epic of Gilgamesh in its written form, these come more than 1,000 years after the first tablets. The Gilgamesh flood narrative dates to around 2100 BCE, roughly 1,300 years after the beer records. 1,300 years of writing used almost entirely for administration before anyone thought to write down a story. Writing didn't begin as literature. It began as a tool. And to understand why, you have to understand the city that invented it. Around 5,000 years ago, Uruk was the largest city on Earth. We estimate it held somewhere between 25,000 and 50,000 people, though scholarly estimates vary, with some proposing figures as low as 15,000 or as high as 80,000. Whatever the precise number, it was extraordinary in a world where most humans lived in villages of a few hundred. That concentration of people created a problem that had never existed before at this scale. How do you feed tens of thousands of people? How do you track who worked, who contributed grain, who was owed rations? How do you manage labor across multiple seasons when the project outlasts any single administrator's memory? Before proto-cuneiform, Mesopotamian accountants used clay tokens, small shaped pieces representing specific quantities of specific goods. A sphere for a unit of grain, a cone for a smaller measure, a disc for a jar of oil. These tokens had been in use across the region for thousands of years before Uruk's population exploded, and for small transactions in small communities, they worked well enough. But as Uruk grew, the token system strained under its own weight. You couldn't easily transport a bag of tokens representing a year's worth of grain deliveries from 10 different farms. You couldn't file it, reference it later, or dispute a discrepancy with any precision. The tokens themselves were the record, and records you can lose, mix up, or accidentally destroy are not reliable enough to run a city. The solution was to stop moving the objects and start recording them. Press the shape of the token into clay, add a numerical mark, seal it with an official's sign. That's proto-cuneiform. Not art, not language in the modern sense, a compression of physical accounting into a portable, durable medium. It was, in the most literal sense, a technological solution to an administrative crisis. So what do the earliest tablets actually say? Most of them are exactly what you'd expect from an accounting system. Quantities of barley, measures of malt, allocations of beer, which in ancient Mesopotamia was a staple food, not a luxury, delivered to workers as part of their daily wage alongside bread. Some tablets record livestock head counts. Some track the movement of textiles, wool, finished cloth, raw fiber, moving in and out of the temple storerooms that functioned as Uruk's central redistribution hub. Some tablets log labor obligations, who owes how many days of work to the temple complex, and what they've already delivered. These are not the tablets of philosophers. They are the tablets of warehouse managers. And then there's Kushim. The Kushim tablet dates to around 3100 BCE. It records a transaction involving barley and malt, the raw ingredients for beer production. And at the bottom, in a sequence of wedge marks that scholars have carefully decoded, is a name. Now, there's genuine scholarly debate here. Some researchers read Kushim as a personal name, which would make it the oldest recorded name of an individual human being in history. Others argue it may be a professional title, a job designation for a specific role in the brewing or accounting system. The signs are ambiguous enough that the field hasn't settled it and may never fully settle it. But here's what doesn't change either way. 5,100 years ago, someone pressed their identity, or their role, into wet clay beside a record of beer. And that clay survived. Proto-cuneiform itself is not fully readable the way later cuneiform is. It records quantities and commodities with precision, but the signs don't yet map on to spoken Sumerian in a systematic way. It's a notation system, powerful and durable, but not yet a complete writing system in the linguistic sense. That full leap, from notation to language, from accounting marks to words you could actually speak aloud, takes another few centuries, emerging as full cuneiform by roughly 2800 BCE. The foundation, though, is already here in those first pressed marks. Here's where the story gets stranger. Mesopotamia wasn't the only place humans invented writing. It was simply the first we can confirm. In China, around 1200 BCE, a completely independent writing system appears on oracle bones, animal bones and turtle shells used in divination rituals. Scribes would heat the bone until it cracked, interpret the fracture patterns, and record the results in carved marks. Those marks are the direct ancestor of modern Chinese characters, making oracle bone script one of the longest continuously used writing traditions in human history. In Mesoamerica, between roughly 900 and 600 BCE, the Olmec and later the Zapotec developed their own scripts, also independently, also with no apparent knowledge of what was happening in Eurasia. The Maya would later build on this tradition into one of the most sophisticated writing systems the ancient world produced, capable of recording history, astronomy, and ritual in extraordinary detail. There's also a much earlier and more contested case, the Jiahu symbols, found in China on pottery and bone, and dating to around 6600 BCE. These marks are sometimes described as proto-writing, but the scholarly consensus is cautious. We can't yet confirm they functioned as a recording system the way proto-cuneiform did. The Jiahu symbols remain genuinely unresolved, and that uncertainty is worth sitting with. What does it mean that writing was invented at least 3 times by people who had no contact with each other? It means writing wasn't a lucky accident that one civilization had and others borrowed. It means writing is a solution, and when a civilization reaches sufficient complexity, the problem it solves becomes unavoidable. The problem is always some version of the same thing. Too much information, too many people, too many transactions for any human memory to hold reliably. The unknown Uruk scribes who first pressed marks into clay weren't uniquely brilliant. They were simply the first to hit the threshold. Uruk got there first. But the pressure that created proto-cuneiform wasn't unique to Uruk. It was the pressure of civilization itself. So, let's return to where we started. We tend to mythologize the birth of writing as a creative breakthrough, the moment humans first reached for permanence, first tried to speak across time to people they'd never meet. A scribe composing something meaningful, reaching for the eternal. And writing became that, eventually, magnificently. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the Book of the Dead, the Vedas, the Iliad, all of it flows downstream from those first clay tablets. But it didn't begin there. It began with a warehouse problem. Writing was invented because a city got too big to run on memory alone. The unknown Uruk scribes who pressed those first marks into clay weren't reaching for immortality. They were trying to get through the workday. They needed to know how much barley had come in, how much beer had gone out, and whether the numbers matched. And in solving that immediate, unglamorous problem, they accidentally built the infrastructure on which every poem, every law, every love letter, every scientific paper would eventually rest. Writing belongs in the same category as the wheel, the aqueduct, the road, a tool that makes large-scale human cooperation possible, not merely more beautiful. Without it, you cannot run a city of tens of thousands of people. You cannot coordinate labor across seasons. You cannot track debt, obligation, or inventory at scale. You cannot, in any meaningful sense, have a state. The specific thing we mean when we say civilization, the layered, interdependent, city-building kind, requires writing the way a body requires a skeleton. The skeleton isn't the interesting part, but without it, nothing stands. Kushim didn't know they were making history. They were doing their job. The poetry came later. The accounting came first. This tablet, this record of beer and barley pressed by unknown Uruk scribes into wet clay, reminds us that the most transformative inventions rarely announce themselves as transformative. They look, at first, like solutions to immediate problems. Mundane, practical, unglamorous. A warehouse manager's tool, not a philosopher's gift. The proto-cuneiform writing system wasn't designed to outlast empires. It was designed to close the books before the clay dried. And yet, here we are, 5,000 years later, still reading it, still arguing about whether Kushim was a person or a job title, still marveling that the marks survived when the city that made them is nothing but a mound of dust in southern Iraq. But if writing began as accounting, what made someone decide to write down a story instead? And why did that moment take another 1,000 years to arrive? We follow the evidence backward to where human invention actually started, not where we wish it had. What detail from these proto-cuneiform tablets surprises you most? The mundanity of what they recorded, or that we can still read Kushim's name at all? The next time you see writing, remember, it was born in a warehouse, not a temple.